Good evening, everyone. On behalf of Lamm Jewish Library of Australia, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all here tonight to this special event. I'm particularly pleased to acknowledge our co-hosts for the evening, March of the Living and Zionism Victoria. We're delighted to be able to share this event. It is so important in the community to work together with other organizations in order to strengthen each other, strengthen our community, and more so at this difficult time when we are all feeling rather isolated. It is this valuable synergy that is created that enhances us all. The LJLA, for those who are not familiar with our space, is the primary National Jewish Resource Centre, a wonderful place for leisure reading and research with materials in English, Hebrew, Yiddish, and much, much more. One of the very unique projects offered by the library is the Write Your Story project, run by our highly skilled and creative coordinator, Adele Hoss. This project facilitates members of the Jewish community to tell and publish their memoirs. To date, the LJLA has published over 140 memoirs and is the largest publisher of Holocaust memoirs in English in the world today. The most recent anthology, the 8th anthology, has just been completed and printed, Voices from the Melbourne Jewish Community 2021. It is a beautiful coffee table book which recounts the stories of 33 contributors. I've got a picture of it here for those, if it's visible. It's a lovely book. It's available for purchase through the library. Tonight's event evolved from a serendipitous spotting of a plaque with Hebrew writing. A very big thanks to Ilana Lewin, who noticed this and then diligently pursued the meaning and story behind the words. I'd also like to specially thank the library director, Lauren Joffe, and our technical whiz, Joey Wilkinson, who have ensured that this interesting idea became a reality. We extend a very warm welcome to Reverend Lawrence Cross from the Holy Trinity St Nicholas Church, the Russian Greek Catholic Church in East St Kilda. Reverend Cross commissioned a plaque in Hebrew outside the church, honoring the life of Klymentiy Sheptytsky, who was posthumously beatified by the Catholic Church and awarded the title of Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem. Righteous Among the Nations is an honorific used by the State of Israel to describe non-Jews who risked their lives during the Holocaust to save Jews from extermination by the Nazis. This phenomenon is an intellectually challenging one, where ethical and moral actions have at certain times been in conflict with the law. Such moral and altruistic behavior, as demonstrated by Klymentiy Sheptytsky, we now appreciate is admirable and really awesome. Thank you, Reverend Cross, for acknowledging this magnificent bravery and righteousness, and we thank you for joining the conversation about this very special person. The moderator for tonight's event is Francis Prince, one of the co-founders and educators of the March of the Living. Francis is a member of the JCCV and holds the multicultural portfolio. She is a board member of the Jewish Christian Muslim Association and vice president of the Faith Community Council of Victoria. Welcome, Francis, and thank you so much for joining us at LJLA once again and for undertaking what we know will be a really fascinating conversation tonight. A message for our audience. Please add any questions to the chat during the conversation. I now hand over to Francis to help explore this amazing story. Francis.
Thank you, Rolene, for that warm welcome. It's much appreciated. Can I just fine-tune one thing? We welcome your questions, everybody. But please, when you put on the chat, can you please put the questions to the host, only to the host, so no one gets disturbed while we're discussing. Okay. And if everyone could please put themselves on mute, except for Father Lawrence Cross. It really is my great pleasure and honour to be in conversation with Father Lawrence Cross, who ministers at the Russian Greek Catholic Church of the Most Holy Trinity Nicholas in East St Kilda, which is, for those of us who are in Melbourne or know Melbourne, it is right here in our own backyard. It is in the heart of the Jewish community of Melbourne. I do want to clarify for our discussion tonight, because it's very important, that we are talking about the Catholic Church. We're not talking about the Russian Eastern Orthodox Church. It is a church from the Eastern tradition, but it is under the umbrella of the Catholic Church, under the spiritual leadership of the Pope in Rome, in the Vatican. There is a fascinating story to the founding and philosophy of the Russian Catholic Church, but that's a talk for another time, not tonight. The church is a small one in terms of numbers, in terms of worldwide membership. The Church of the Most Holy Trinity, St Nicholas in East St Kilda, is the only such parish in Melbourne. So I welcome you, Father Lawrence Cross. Before we get into our actual topic for the evening, I would like you to please tell us about yourself, your own background, your own upbringing, and your religious life.
Oh, okay. That's a tall order, you know. Okay, Francis, I'll try to be brief and to the point. Well, first of all, I was brought up in Sydney, and I was born in 1943, right in the middle of the war, and in an Australia which is very, very different. So I'm not a baby boomer. I'm a war baby, in fact. So the I was brought up in I suppose basically in an Irish Catholic family in Sydney, predominantly Irish Catholic, and our lives very much revolved around our families and the family of communities and the church. It was very central to our lives, so as a kid, I sort of fell in love with the church, strangely enough, not with playing at being a priest or, you know, sacred mumbo jumbo, so to speak, but I found that as a little boy, I suppose of about 10, I was building what other people would have called cubby houses, but I discovered really later on that what I was actually building were things that were strangely temple-like, with inner sanctuaries and all. I learned about temples much later, but and I was plucked out of my childhood in a way by a kind of an accident. One of my sisters, who was always had an eye for opportunities, took me one Saturday into the Sydney Cathedral, and I had to sing for a priest who played the piano, 2 terrible songs. I won't tell you what they were, and I couldn't even understand why I was there. And the next thing is that during the school holidays, a letter came to say that little Lawrence has been accepted as a chorister in St Mary's Cathedral Choir in the city, and which meant a scholarship to the cathedral school and training as a chorister. And that was marvelous because it was wonderful music, you know, the music of Palestrina and Vittoria and of the 16th and 17th centuries was really quite something. And that sort of pulled me out of my much loved but cozy parish life and, you know, neighborhood life, and it opened up another dimension for me. And I discovered in some ways the beauty of worship and of the church as Christian art and music and everything that goes with it. And so that's the first part of the story. And I was very much then a Roman Catholic, I suppose. And of course the liturgy is, and all was still in you know, good, you know, church Latin and all. So I was Latinate as well. But then I went to school in the last 2 years of school to a rather strict boarding school in Strathfield. And I was thinking of joining the order that ran our school in the city. And part of my job, one of my jobs in that boarding school was to collect the mail from Strathfield Station. And that school, by the way, is now Australian Catholic University. And so I had to ride my bicycle down there and collect the mail. And I was intrigued by this marvellous building in Strathfield, with its high tower, with marvellous onion domes and all. I thought, and just being a curious kid, I got off the bike this one morning and mailbag in hand, and mind you, the headmaster and all would have killed me if they knew what I was doing. And I went in, and lo and behold, it was the early morning service of the Russian Orthodox Cathedral of St Peter and Paul in Strathfield. And immediately it was bang, straight away, I thought, oh, this is where I want to be. And I couldn't have made the recognition of that unless, of course, I'd been brought up as I was in the Western tradition. It's kind of, I don't know how you explain that, if there's a kind of equivalences in the Jewish traditions, but there are Jewish traditions, not just one, I take it. So I then went in search of this, and in a way, I found it, and then later on, it found me, in that I realized that there was actually a Russian Catholic Church, which was the mirror image of this, but in communion with the Pope. And so I again began to study, and was lucky enough to meet some of the two clergy that were in Australia of that tradition. And finally, I asked to be changed over to it legally by the church authorities. And then the rest is kind of history. I began as a teacher to earn a living in Catholic schools. Later, I finished my first degree, in 1973. That was a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Sydney. And they evidently liked what I had done. And in 1975, I was shipped off to Oxford for 3 years, to St John's College, where I read history, basically, and much of it religious history. And then returning to Australia, I was looking for work and came to Melbourne to teach in the Institute of Catholic Education, and met my wife there. She was a teacher in art, in children's education in art, arts educator, and then wrote my doctorate in the Melbourne College of Divinity in the 90s, trying to bring up a family. It wasn't a lot of fun, up at night writing a thesis. But anyway, so that's how that all happened. And then I was worshipping in our little Russian Catholic community, which was at that stage located in Kew, in an old house in Kew. They'd been there since about 1950. About 1950 or 49 even. The priest was, even at that stage, was starting to show his age, and this is in the 80s. He wanted a deacon, and then a little bit later, so I was ordained deacon, and a little bit later I was ordained priest, and I ended up taking over from him. So it all crept up on me, and in our tradition, of course, to be ordained to any ministry like that, deacon or priest, I have to have my wife's permission. If she says no, well, I don't get to become priest or deacon or anything like that. Fortunately, my wife was very happy about it. So she's gone to God, by the way. It's her 10th anniversary Sunday week. Yeah, that's how it all happened. And then to fill in the last little bit, the house in Kew was somewhat dilapidated, and we sold it in around about 2012, and then the proceeds went back to Rome, actually, because they had helped to build it or buy it in the first place, and we were looking for a relocation, a church to go somewhere. Anyhow, I came across that property there in East St Kilda for sale, and there's a story behind that, but I won't bore you with all the details. There's really quite a story, actually, and so we ended up being the successful bidder. And the other two, well, I wasn't actually a bidder. That's the story. That's the crazy part. There were two serious bidders, both of whom backed out. One was a group of Jewish gentlemen who obviously wanted it, and the other was, of all things, the Russian Orthodox from Paran, and they were the ones who got the nod from the estate agents. but I was about to leave, and the estate agents who knew me said, no, Father, don't go, don't go. I thought, why? Just a minute, what's happening? I'm telling you the story now, I realise, but it's worth hearing. The Jewish gentlemen are gone, you know. I don't know what their purposes were. They bid vigorously, but the Russian Orthodox then sort of almost arguing with the estate agents over in the corner. And it turned out that they wanted a ridiculously long settlement, and the Uniting Church, who was selling the building, didn't want that. So they ended up leaving. And so the estate agent said, well, Father, if you can sign the check now, you can have it for that price.
And when was that, Father Lawrence? How long have you been there? When was that?
We started in 2011. So
okay, thank you.
So anyhow, that's how it happened.
Okay, so you've been there for the last 10 years.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
We actually could speak for hours just about that story, but I'm mindful of the time. So
of course,
we've got a lot to talk about still. I actually would like to explain at this stage how we actually got here, and Rolene talked a bit about it, but I'd like to flesh it out a little bit more, because then people can see the excitement of meeting you and finding out more about this story. Alana Lewin, who's here, who's really a volunteer extraordinaire in our community, she was going for a walk, which is one of the few things that us in Melbourne can do, and she found herself stuck at the traffic lights. Joey, if you could put on slide 1A, please. And she's going for a walk, and here she is, corner Hotham and Inkerman Road, slap bang in, I guess, the Jewish neighbourhood. She's going up and down, she's waiting for the lights to change, and she has a closer look. We have the next slide, please, Joey. And as she's looking, she sees this plaque, and she looks at it carefully. Don't try and squint, people who are watching. I'll have it up. The next slide will have the full thing up there. But she looks at it and she sees this plaque in front of this beautiful edifice, this church, and she realizes, obviously, it's in Hebrew. So she does somewhat of a double take, looks again and again, and she's wondering what on earth is going on here, as any of us would outside a church. And so she took a photo, quickly sent it to her daughter, Jade, who I had the pleasure of teaching many decades ago, who is fluent in Hebrew, and she translated it for her mother. Now, Alana knows when she's on a good thing, and something very interesting. She calls me, gushes out her find. She calls Cedric Geffen, head of March of the Living, and Alana, who volunteers at many places, including the Lamm Jewish Library, called Lauren Joffe of the library about her discovery, and we're all excited together. Now, before we say what happened next, Joey, can you put up the next slide, please? Okay, those who have good Hebrew can rattle it off by yourself. In case you don't, this is what Alana is looking at, and what Father Lawrence Cross has put in front of his church. Lichvado shel hakadosh mevorach shel knisiyah zo. So basically, in honor of the blessed saint of this church, Ha'av Klymentiy Sheptytsky, Father Klymentiy Sheptytsky, Huchar kechasid umot ha'olam, who has been recognized as a righteous among the nation, who those of us who know that is Yad Vashem's great honor to give to righteous among the nations, people who at great personal risk save Jews. And this honor was bestowed upon Father Klymentiy Sheptytsky in 1995. Sheyachad im Achav, who together with his brother, the Archbishop Andre, Hitzil v'hagen al me'ot gvarim v'nashim tzeirim u'bnei noar Yehudiyim, who saved and protected hundreds of Jewish men, women, youth, and children. Min hakochot hanatziyim sheshaltu be'Ukraina, from the Nazi forces that conquered the Ukraine between the years 1941 to 1944. Niftar kekadosh bekele Sovieti, who died as a saint in a Soviet prison in the year 1951. This is what Father Lawrence Cross commissioned and erected for all passers-by. I'm still getting teary and excited when I reread it, and believe me, over the last 2 weeks, I have read it many, many times. So while we're getting excited about this, Ilana contacts Father Lawrence and speaks to him and learns more about the backstory and the history, and on behalf of all of us, invites him to what ends up being tonight's event. And Father Lawrence, you were generous and gracious without hesitation in your open-hearted acceptance. And so we are all here tonight. So Father Lawrence, can I please ask you, why? Why did you erect this amazing plaque? When did you do it? Why is it in Hebrew only? How did you get it translated into Hebrew? Can you please share with us the story?
All right. Well, first of all, why in Hebrew? Because it's for Jewish people. It's not for the lightly clad Aussies toddling by the church. It's for Jewish people who are serious about their faith and their history. And secondly, it's an acknowledgement that we are in a predominantly Jewish neighbourhood. And secondly, that there is an intersection between our stories. That's the main thing. And that sign is not for, as I say, for just the casual passers-by. It's for men and women of the Jewish faith. And that's why it's in Hebrew. And I have to say, I'm no Hebrew scholar. I did, in fact, do my biblical studies in the Department of Semitic Studies in the University of Sydney, but I was a rather a dud in Hebrew 1, and I've got enough Hebrew for my theological terms, but that's about it. So this was actually done for me by, and as far as I know, this Rabbi Ralph Ganender's secretary in the synagogue up in Inkerman Road. So that's the Hebrew contribution there. And I say I was friends with Ralph's rather. I hope I still am. I haven't seen him forever, but and there's, by the way, there's another story behind this as well, because we're also doing a whole lot of stuff in Europe. I hope soon, cooperation between both European Jewry and our church too in the Czech Republic, but that's another story. But so
which we will get back to a bit later.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, sure.
I want that story. Yes.
So now, Klymentiy Sheptytsky was the second. Now here comes a term. He's the second exarch of our small Russian Catholic Church. Exarch simply means shepherd and father. And he was his brother Andrew was the Archbishop of the Greek Catholic Church in Ukraine, and it's right to call both himself and his brother Andrew Ukrainians. But in fact, they really were sort of semi-Polish aristocrats. In fact, both of whom ended up in the church. Clement was the last one really to go into holy orders. He had a secular profession first. And he became a monk, and his brother was the Archbishop. Now, his brother, the Archbishop, was the person who, first of all, organised our church properly and appointed, with the Pope's permission, a Russian priest as our first exarch. Now, that first Russian priest was called Leonid Fyodorov, and he was murdered by the communists and died up near Ekaterinburg in 1932, I think. And when that happened, Andrei then appointed his own brother, Klymentiy, as the second exarch. And that's how he comes to be then based in Lvov in the 40s. So, and that's our Russian Catholic connection. It's through the Ukrainian Church and the two brothers.
Can I ask you, Father Lawrence, how many years ago did you put up the plaque?
I think about 4.
4 years ago.
Yes.
And I'd like to, sorry.
It's the first time anyone's ever stopped and noticed it. I didn't try to count or try and find out who's been taking notice of it. But so this is the first time. Ilana is the first person who has raised the question. Any number.
Thank you,
of people.
Ilana.
What's that?
Yes, I thank you, Lana, and I think Father Lawrence, I'm just warning you now.
Yeah.
You may find there are some crowds after tonight, starting
That's
tomorrow.
all right.
You may actually drop by and have a bit of a visit and a look-see and some photos taken.
Yes, of course.
Of this.
Yeah, problem.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Okay. I'd like to give a bit of context to the story and the place and the time of the Sheptytsky brothers.
Yes.
We always need background for whatever we're talking about, context. So we're talking obviously about the Second World War. We're talking about the city you mentioned, Lvov.
Yes.
Now, at that stage, Lvov was in Poland.
Yeah.
Today, it is called Lviv and is in the Ukraine.
Yes.
Joey, can we have the map up, please? Thank you. All right, so let's explain. I always used to say to my students, have to know some geography to be able to learn history, because without it, things don't make sense.
True.
Okay, I'm not giving a whole history lesson, but we'll understand the story better if we get some of the geography. Okay, so if you look down the big line, the broken line, as you see, it says the German-Soviet demarcation line. Okay, those who know their history know August 1939, we've got the Molotov-Ribbentrop agreement, where the secret section is the Russians and the Germans carve up poor old Poland. Now, September 1939, those on the west, we can see places that we all know, the names of the Krakow, the Warsaw, the Lodz, the Lublin, and so on. Straight away, the Nazis, the Germans are there.
Yeah.
Now, if you look down south, Lvov, spelled L-W-O-W in this case, Lvov, is in the Russian side. Now, it was no picnic under the Russians, but it was a hell of a lot better for Jews than under Nazis. Now, again, let's go quickly. 22nd of June, 1941, the Germans double-cross the Russians and come across that line. So if we're looking at Lvov there, this is when, the Shoah basically comes to this part of what was then Poland. And the Germans actually entered Lvov on the 30th of June, 1941. So we've got shootings, we've got selections, we've got violence, we've got the ghetto starting in November. And then what comes with that, obviously, dislocation, overcrowding, food shortages, illness, death. Then the ghetto is shrunk even further. And then the deportations begin in mid-March 1942. And you can see I've marked straight to the death camp, Belzec. You can all see that I've marked that B-E-L-Z-E-C. That is one of the 6 death camps, and the deportations begin there. There are also the Jews of Lvov are also sent to a number of labor camps. The most, infamous one, for those who know, the Janowska camp, spelled Janowska. The Janowska camp, a lot of those who were considered fit for work were sent to from Lvov. It was just on the outskirts. They didn't go far. It was just in the outskirts. And then we have the continuous violence, mass shootings, and so on. Now, we get to the Sheptytsky brothers. Now, can you see I've got highlighted UNIV, U-N-I-W. UNIV was the main monastery run by the Sheptytsky brothers. The order was called, now I don't know, Father Lawrence, if I get it right, pronunciation, is it Studite?
Studite, that's right.
Studite is the name of the order, which I don't want to go through the history now, but the brothers were central to the refounding of this order. So that was like what, they had a number of monasteries, I believe about 8, dotted around Lvov. But it's like UNIV was like the mother monastery.
That's right.
As well as these monasteries, they had a number of convents and orphanages also under their auspices. Virtually all of these were used to hide Jewish people, not just youngsters, but a lot of youngsters during the war. And they shuffled these people around from one monastery to an orphanage to another monastery. As the Germans, there were lots of raids. So then they moved and they kept shuffling around these people. And I guess we're talking about the Sheptytsky brothers, but from reading a lot of the memoirs over the last couple of weeks, it seems that many of the monks were central to this. It wasn't like the Sheptytsky brothers, as the leaders knew and other people didn't know. It was not the case at all. The other monks were instrumental in hiding, in guarding, in disguising, and in building the hiding spots within buildings and the shuffling around at night. So there were many people involved in this project under the leadership of the Sheptytsky brothers. I'd like to ask you, Father Lawrence, against that background, can you please tell us what you know about these two towering figures? Now, they were towering physically. They were both
very big men.
Eyewitnesses say their physical sort of stature was very impressive, but their characters were even more impressive. Can you please tell us what you know about the Archbishop Klymentiy Sheptytsky and the Venerable Metropolitan Bishop Andrei Sheptytsky, who was the head of the Ukrainian Catholic Church? What do you know about them, their story in saving Jews?
Well, from our point, putting the Jewish question aside, one of the I think the most important thing about them is that they represent a particular kind of represent a particular kind of mind and culture, which is let me see, how can I put it? They are people who are hell-bent on reconciliation in the Christian context, safe with us. They very much saw the existence of our church as a kind of a connection back to the Russian Orthodox Church, and in the hope of finding sort of Christian unity again, between as a like of a bridge between Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism. So Sheptytsky was very much involved in that. And he, in some ways, is one of the moving spirits about the very founding of our church. It was he who presented our case to Rome, for example, to get papal approval, you know, and supporting our Russian mission. Now, we're very tiny. There's only about, at most, 10 priests in Russia, in continental Russia anyway, at the time. But Andrei cultivated that, and his brother Klymentiy is part of it. But he was in the monastery though. As a monastic. So both of them participated in that, and then of course when our first exarch was killed by the Bolsheviks, after a horrible incarceration in Solovki up on the White Sea, for 10 years, the Klymentiy took over, but this time not located in Russia itself, but rather in Ukraine, because as you know the borders there were all very fluid. Anyhow, so. Again, but both of them always involved in reconciliation, sort of inter-Christian, and also, as you can see, both of them also had a deep sympathy for Jews. Now, there's a backstory to that, but I'll have to be very fast. In some ways, the person who is in one of the founding inspirers of the Russian Catholic movement died in 1900, and that was Solovyev, Vladimir Solovyev, who's probably one of the most interesting thinkers, philosophers, scholars in late 19th century Russia. Now, he was an Orthodox who became a Catholic and was also dedicated to reconciliation. And Solovyev's spirit, if you like, permeates our church. Solovyev also was notorious for his, and I say notorious on purpose, from the point of view of the Russian government, of the Tsars, for his Jewish sympathies. The Solovyev took the Jewish inheritance in Christianity very, very seriously, and in trying to explore theologically and philosophically many interesting things, he ended up learning Hebrew himself, and his great friend was a Rabbi Getz. I've forgotten Rabbi Getz's first name now, but the two of them were were thick as thieves, and to the point where the Tsar actually personally condemned Soloviev. They called him that psychopath, because that psychopath was doing things which were uncomfortable. He was the one voice amongst all the Russian intelligentsia who one voice raised in protest against the treatment of the Jews in Tsarist Russia.
So that influence,
he lost
obviously,
possession and everything. Yeah.
So that influence is part of the thinking.
Yes, exactly.
Of
It overflows from Soloviev to Sheptytsky boys. Yeah.
Yes.
Soloviev did a huge amount of work. He was very interested in Kabbalah as well, of course. And in the idea of holy wisdom, and God manhood. These are themes which are a big thing. He's a study on his own. He's a polymath and a genius, yeah.
I've actually learned, if you may not remember, but our first phone conversation, you mentioned him in the first sentence or two.
Did I?
So I've been doing, which I had never, to my embarrassment, I guess, I've never heard of him. So I've been doing my reading on his philosophies and so on. Could we shift to, so when did you learn the highly risky saving that the Sheptytsky brothers and the other monks did? Like, do you learn the story? Like, when were you first aware of what they actually did during the war?
Well, I think I've almost always known it, but something alerted me to it. And I may as well bring it home now, and to me personally, in that now this person remains nameless, but my cardiologist, who has looked after me now for 20 plus years, is the son of one of the boys that Sheptytsky saved in Lvov. And my cardiologist told me that, because and he said, his dad was sheltered by the monks in Lvov, and they hid him away, sometimes disguising him as an altar boy or as kind of a little apprentice monk, but he wasn't anything of the sort. But he was a Holocaust survivor, because I think he must have been grabbed towards the end and gone somewhere terrible, but survived, being young, and towards the end of the Nazi occupation. And so I always take that very personally, in that I regard the blessing returning to me through my cardiologist, because I'm a priest of their church. I'm a spiritual descendant as a Russian Catholic priest, of the Sheptytsky boys. So, as I say, the blessing returns to you, doesn't it?
Yes, thank you. Now, when we think there's 150 or hundreds of people that they saved.
Yes.
Now, we don't have all those names, because as we know, you had to survive day after day after day.
Of course.
So obviously there were those, yes, they may have left then the monasteries, but their luck ran out after that. We don't know all the names.
No.
But I've certainly been trying to find some of them. What I'd like to show now, Joey, if you can get it ready, please. We have a 3-minute video, and I want to thank the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter organization, which has given us the permission to show this. And if anyone wants to, we'll just hang on a second. If anyone wants to Google it, Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. This is about a 25-minute video, but I'm just sliced out 3 minutes. There are 3 survivors who were hidden by the Sheptytsky brothers and the Studite monks. Lily, I don't know if these people are alive anymore, and they may not be, because the video was taken quite a while ago. There are 3 people. One of them was, when they were speaking now, lives in England, one from Israel, and one from the United States. So it's only a snippet that we're going to show now of 3 minutes. So again, thank you to the sponsors of the video, the Ukrainian Jewish Encounter. Thank you, Joey. Can we play it?
Together.
The process of integrating children of various cultures, making Jewish children inconspicuous to the ever-searching Gestapo, required discretion and understanding.
So I was left in this new world, which I somehow instinctively, I don't remember my own feelings at the time. I'm sure they were very confused. but I instinctively felt that I had to adapt to, and that my life depended on adapting to this new world. I had to, at the age of 7, I spoke German, which was my native language, and Polish, which my nanny taught me. But now I had to learn Ukrainian. I had to learn the rudiments of those prayers that a 7-year-old would know. Ojcze nasz, Borodite Divo. I had to learn how to read a little bit in Cerkovny so that I could follow the prayers in the prayer book. I had to learn how to cross myself and all of the other things that a 7-year-old would normally, living in that culture, know, so that I could pass.
Daniel Tymczyna was the head of our orphanage, and he was very careful not to show others that we are Jewish. So we are taking baths, either 2 of us, 2 of the children, Jewish children, or the 3rd one was bathing with him, not to show our identity.
For a 7-year-old, that's a major thing to accomplish. And I know that every time my children, but particularly my grandchildren, reach the age of 7, I would look at them and I would marvel. That I could accomplish that.
Amazing.
The Metropolitan used his many personal connections and the wide network of his church in support of this integration and concealment process.
We were sent to Ubocz, where Matej Humeni was the Mother Superior, and she took my mother in to her residence. She was separate from the actual convent and the orphanage, a little house separately, but within 2 steps from each other. And she took my mother, but she said also, don't be afraid, your mother is here and you are here, you are not going to be separated, which was quite wonderful, quite wonderful.
Here are some of the documents that the Gestapo was looking for me.
And gradually, I got used to the work schedule. We went to a school which was run by a schoolmaster. His name was Duke. Unbeknownst to us, there was another 5-year-old child with his mother and aunt hidden in the attic of Duke's house. That boy, I eventually became Roald Hoffmann, who was the Nobel Prize winner in chemistry and professor of chemistry at Cornell, also a well-recognized poet. And he was hidden in that attic, which we didn't know about.
This is picture
sorry,
of Rabbi Kahane.
Joey, sorry, can we cut it now? I'm sorry. I'm sorry to do that to everyone. Please Google it. I know it's fascinating.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful.
Have you seen this, Father Lawrence?
No. I'm learning it. I mean, I know a lot of it, but I know it theoretically, but I've not ever seen the pictures. Yeah, and that, of course, that's Andrei Sheptytsky with the cross on and sitting in the middle of all the clergy.
Correct. I'll send you the link afterwards.
Yeah, please. I'll be showing it to my congregation next. Yeah.
Good. I've got heaps for you, believe me. And I just want to mention 2 particular people who were hidden in the Studite monks, in their monastery by the monks, because they're the only 2 actually books that I can find that have been written.
Yeah.
Joey, can you put up photo 7, please? Just we see the front of the book. Okay. Joey, okay, thank you. Okay, here we go. this book, A Journey Through Illusions by Kurt I. Lewin. I actually read the book in one sitting, I've got to tell you. I spent Monday, I couldn't move, and for lots and lots of reasons. And Kurt Lewin writes in such great detail about what happened to him and how he was hidden and how his father, who did not survive, who was Rabbi Dr. Ezekiel Lewin,
Yes.
actually, when the Nazis arrived, he went with some others to the Archbishop to try and organize bringing the Torah scrolls there for safekeeping.
Yes.
And he was murdered quite early on in the ghetto. But Kurt spent 2 years living as a monk. And he talks about that in his book. And I just want to read one section, if I may, to everybody. And it's about his beginning days there. The routine of the monastic life was extremely oppressive to me, as I was not accustomed to kneel for hours, listen to chants in an unknown language and meditate. The first few days were very difficult for me. But then slowly, I submitted to the rhythm of the monastic life. I learned how to sing in the choir and recite psalms in Old Slavonic. One day, when I was asked by a monk to recite the psalms at the midnight service, I realized that I had been accepted by the community. And he spent 2 years there. And he actually kept in touch with a lot of the monks who were a bit younger for the rest of his life. They were friends, they were together, and he himself actually filled in some of the documentation to get Klymentiy Sheptytsky beatified by Pope Paul John II in 1991. He was part of the testimony that enabled that. And one of the most amazing and for me moving things that I read in Kurt Lewin's book here, he has 2 sons, who are probably my age now. His 2 sons, he named one Andre, and the other he named Klymentiy. His own 2 children he named after them. The other person is Rabbi David Kahane, also wrote a book, which I'm having trouble finding. Joey, can you just show us the front of the book, please? This is Lvov Ghetto Diary by Rabbi David Kahane, who obviously did survive. And he was also hidden, but he got there quite late. He escaped from the Janovska labor camp, and then he was taken in here. And it's just astonishing, his story of being hidden and being moved from one place to the next. And he writes, again briefly, in one of the corners, a hiding place was prepared for me. It was surrounded with books on all sides, and a person entering the library could not notice that someone was hidden behind the books. I was not given a bed, but a lounge chair on which I could sleep or rest. For the time being, I remained there. I stayed in the library in Lviv for a while. And then one night, they told me that that very night, I would have to leave the palace and move to another Studite monastery. It was not safe for me there anymore. There were too many people, including Germans, coming on business to the palace. And so late that night, he names a number of the names of the monks, they disguised me and then they moved me to another monastery. And it goes on where they put him. And then there were secret raids. They moved him around the monasteries from one place to another. And I want to finish their story by this Rabbi Kahane and Kurt Lewin, who's a young child. Rabbi Kahane was friends of Kurt Lewin's father, the 2 rabbis, Rabbi Doctor and so on. they spent some time, not that long, together, hidden in the same spot. And Kurt Lewin writes about this duality of his existence, that all the time there were these, he had two parts to his identity, that when he and Rabbi Kahana were together, Rabbi Kahana would teach him and would teach him Torah. And then the monks would come and say, okay, time to leave your hiding places. And then both Jewish men would switch identities. They would literally put on the garb of the monks. And Kurt Lewin would be the novice monk, and his name would then be Roman Mitka. And Rabbi Kahana would become a monk, Brother Matthew. And this is the duality and the movements that these two men took on. And each person has an amazing story. I'm going to stop there because of time, but I do want to just let people know that Archbishop Andrei Sheptytsky, he died in 1944. He was already elderly and ill. But after the war, I'm afraid that with the Soviet Union coming in, that Klymentiy Sheptytsky was arrested and he died in 1951 in the Gulag. Once the Soviet Union collapsed, the Studite order returned, and that Univ monastery came back to life.
Yes. I've been there.
You have?
Yes.
So in 1995, Yad Vashem bestowed the Righteous Among the Nations on Klymentiy, and he was, as I mentioned before, beatified and made a saint, if I'm correct, by Pope Paul John II in 2001. And I always say about Pope Paul John II that if it was possible for Jews to have a pope, he would be my pope. And I would never forget, when just a year before these events, is when, in the year 2000, is when John Paul II visited Israel, the only pope, until then to have done so, and put his notice of prayer inside the Kotel in the Wailing Wall. And he is the pope that beatified Klymentiy Sheptytsky. I'm going to stop there. And as you are all aware, we've just started scratching the surface here. There is so much more to the story, and maybe Father Lawrence, if you're ready to come back sometime, we'll continue this story.
Can I tell you one more thing?
Please.
There's something inside the church too, as well as outside. And in the church, you will find an icon of a young German, or apparently a German. His name is Alexander Schmerel. Alexander Schmerel his mother was a Russian Orthodox, his father was a German Catholic. And Alexander Schmerel and a girl called Sophie Scholl. Sophie Scholl, you might probably know. They are the two moving figures in founding the White Rose in the 1940s in Nazi Germany. Both of them were beheaded by the Gestapo, as you know. Now, so Alexander Schmerel is also one of our saints too, and I have his icon in a very special position in the church to remember the whole terrible catastrophe that overtook both Jewry and Eastern Europe, And the last thing is that this has never gone out of our minds, and so our Congress, which we've been planning now for 2 years, Global Congress of our church, we were supposed to have had it last year in the Czech Republic, but COVID ruined it. Hopefully we can this coming June in the Czech Republic, and the theme of that is Eastern Christianity in a post-Holocaust, post-Gulag world. So, the Jewish theme will be part of our Congress as well. So this will all come back there. And I've invited Rabbi Yehoshua Arens, who was the chief rabbi in Nuremberg in Germany, as one of our principal speakers. So, always we're keeping the Jewish connection alive. And there are, and I won't bore you with this but there are theological reasons for doing that too, because I think Christians have to realise that they're standing on Jewish shoulders always. And one last thing about Solovyev in the 19th century, a number of things. In writing to Rabbi Getz once, he said, "My quill is always ready for the defense of Israel in distress." And we've picked that up from him. Our quill, or whatever it is, our ministry is always ready to support Israel in distress. Now, I don't mean the geographic nation, I mean the people. So there's the connection, and it's always there for us. It's been there since Solovyev's time. And by the way, the coda for all of that is, you realise that when Andrei Sheptytsky died and they murdered Klymentiy in later on in Russia, the Soviets actually banned our church, and we were underground ever afterwards. So, yeah, so someone has been hiding us then since. Anyway, that's enough. It's been very enjoyable. Thank you tonight.
I think that's thank you so much. I think it's such an appropriate place to end. I don't think there's anything we can add after that. I would just like to turn and invite Cedric Geffen, the Martyr of the Living Australia, to actually officially thank you, Father Lawrence. Okay. I will ring you later. I will ring you tomorrow. But please, Cedric.
Can you finish with also with an appropriate prayer after Cedric? Short one.
I'm not sure what prayer.
Okay. The Bible's full of them.
Okay. Well, maybe one person online may put their hand up too. We'll see how we go. All right.
All right.
Okay. Cedric, say thank you, and other people while listening to thank you. Someone may put up their hand who feels that there is an appropriate prayer, which I can think of, but I'm happy to toss to somebody else.
Good.
Okay. We'll see. Okay, Cedric, please.
Thank you so much, Father Lawrence. And Francis, that was absolutely breathtaking and riveting, and opens up so many vistas and so many opportunities for further investigation. Listening to the story of the powers of good prevailing even in the hardest conditions is truly uplifting and inspiring. The inherent ability of humankind to make the right choices, the sanctity of life, the need to stand up against injustice, to love and respect one's fellow person as one does oneself, are some of the core values that underpin the ethos of March of the Living. Mm-hmm. Although COVID has not allowed us to conduct our physical program for the past 2 years, our online endeavors, such as this, continue regardless and with greater intensity. And I cordially invite all people here on this call this evening to follow us, March of Living Australia, on all our social media channels, and also on our website, www.motl.com.au. And to end off, I can only say that, Francis, as was mentioned right at the start, was one of the founders of March of Living Australia. I can say that I'm a disciple of Francis and others like her that started the organization. We never stop learning, and being able to learn something like this, where it's in our backyard, and we pass it by every day, and yet it takes a Saint Ilana to find this, and to open up these vistas for us, will ensure that we continue learning. And hopefully, as Francis said, we'd love to have you come and join us again as we continue to explore this. And I can certainly say that there is so much more to explore, and we've already got a few things lined up that we will try and put together in the coming weeks and months. So thank you to Francis, thank you Ilana, thank you to the Lamm Library, and thank you, of course, to Father Lawrence.
Thank you so much for that, Cedric. I actually would like to invite you, Father Lawrence, and not doing this to evade the issue, that if you would like to say a prayer.
Oh dear.
Sorry if I put you on the spot.
That's all right. Give me a second.
Okay. Well, when you come back, baby, I've got a prayer that I would like to say very quickly. And mine is a one-liner. Yeah. Okay, so I'm giving you time to open up. Okay, and what I would like to say, and I hope everyone online will approve, is what we call the Shechayanu prayer. The prayer when something we haven't done for a long time or never before, and there's a new event, and we celebrate that we have lived until we have come to this day. And I think tonight, meeting you, Father Lawrence Cross, for us in our Jewish community, and I hope I'm speaking on behalf of others, is that to come to this event and hear what you have said, really the Shechayanu prayer for us is appropriate. And I am going to say it, and I am going to say it with God's name, because I do think it's appropriate for all of us. So Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam Shechayanu v'kimanu v'higiyanu lazman hazeh. Thank you.
Perhaps I can add 2 bobs worth on behalf of the library. We are at this point in time before Rosh Hashanah and before the New Year. And when we get together in our small, very small family units on the first night and we have dinner, we will precede the dinner by saying, Yehi ratzon milfanecha ad Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu shetchadesh aleinu shana tova u'metuka. May it be your will, the Lord Almighty, the God of our forefathers, that you renew for us a good and sweet year. And while it particularly speaks to the Jewish community, because it's our Jewish New Year, we wish that to all our friends and to all the Australian community together.
Thank you, Danny, for such appropriate words. Okay, over to you now, please, Father Lawrence.
Well, I think possibly, I don't know why this has sort of popped up, but just in Psalm 53, the fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are false, corrupt, and vile. There is no good one left. God is looking down from heaven at the sons of men to see if a single one is wise, if a single one is seeking God. All have turned aside, all alike are tainted. There is not one good man left, not a single one. Are they so ignorant, these evil men who swallow my people, as they were eating bread and never invoke God? They will be struck with fear without reason. Since God scatters the bones of the apostate, they are disgraced, for God rejects them. Who will bring Israel salvation from Zion? When God brings his people home, what joy for Jacob, what happiness for Israel.
Thank you for those words. And on that note, Shana Tova to everybody here, and we wish you good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you from New Zealand.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
It was amazing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. And good
I'll
night.
talk to you during the week.
Yeah, we'll
Amazing.
talk.
Thank
Yeah,
you,
yes.
Father Cross. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye-bye.